Hello to all the students, myself Dr. Shilpi Agarwal, and today we will be discussing the anatomy questions of FMG recall which was in August 2020. So beginning with the questions. Now in this question, if you see what has been mentioned, it is an image based question as well as it is a clinical based question. Now in this question it says that a 35-year-old male presents in emergency after a road traffic accident with fracture in this arrow marked location, over here, and he presents with inability to extend at his wrist. Now this is pointing towards wrist drop. Then apart from this, on examination there is loss of sensation of dorsum of lateral aspect of hand and the fingers. So if we say this is the dorsum of hand, and in the dorsum of hand it is saying the lateral aspect of the hand and the fingers towards this side, and this side we know this area, the skin of this area is supplied by radial nerve. So this sensory loss is pointing towards the radial nerve. And when we talk about the fracture at this location of the humerus, this is the fracture at the shaft of humerus. And at the shaft of the humerus, if the fracture is there, it will involve the nerve which is running in the spiral groove, and the nerve which is running in the spiral groove, it is the radial nerve, So looking on all the features, it is now pointing towards the radial nerve, and the answer of this question is the radial nerve. Now let us just talk about this radial nerve. When we talk about this radial nerve, we know that this radial nerve, it is a branch of the posterior cord of brachial plexus, and as it comes, you can see very well it is going towards the posterior aspect of the shaft of the humerus at this location where it is running in the spiral groove, and it is giving off the various branches. It gives off the various branches above the spiral groove, then within the spiral groove and below the spiral groove. In this location, that is above and at the spiral groove, it is giving supply to the muscles triceps and anconeus. Then below the spiral groove, that is at this location, it is giving branches to brachioradialis, and as well as to extensor carpi radialis longus. Then just near this point, that is at this level, this is the level of the lateral epicondyle. At this point it divides into two branches, one is the superficial branch and a deep branch of the radial nerve. So we can very well see a branch going over here, another branch going over here. So this branch is superficial radial nerve. This is the superficial radial nerve, which is a sensory branch. It is a sensory branch, and it will be supplying the dorsum of the hand. In the dorsum of hand, it is supplying the lateral aspect. So it supplies the lateral part of dorsum of hand. It supplies the lateral part of dorsum of hand, and specifically it is supplying, when we are talking about the fingers, it is supplying the lateral 3.5 fingers except the nail bed, right, except the nail bed. The nail beds towards the lateral 3.5 fingers, it is supplied by the median nerve, and the rest of the fingers towards the dorsum side is being supplied by the superficial radial nerve, which is a branch of radial nerve itself. Talking about this another branch over here, this is the deep radial branch, or the deep branch of the radial nerve, and this is also given the term as posterior introitious nerve. It is given the term as posterior introitious nerve, and now this nerve, it supplies the rest of the extensor muscles. So it supplies the rest of the extensor muscles of, or you can say the rest of the muscles of posterior compartment of forearm. So it will be supplying the rest of the muscles of posterior compartment like all other extensors and as well as supinator. So all these are supplied by the posterior introitious nerve. Now after this, if I talk about, like if I say that there is a fracture at this level, So that means the nerve supply to all these extensor group of muscles is affected, and these extensor muscle group, it is bringing about the extension at the level of the wrist. And if this extension at the wrist is affected, it will lead to wrist drop. So in this condition, it will be leading to the wrist drop. It will be leading to the wrist drop, which is loss of extension it is a loss of extension at the wrist. When the fracture is at the shaft of the humerus, which is being mentioned over here, so I will just mention this fracture at the shaft of humerus. So we are seeing in this the wrist drop, but in this case the extension at elbow is intact. Why the extension at the elbow is intact? Because the triceps is spared. Because the triceps, it is spared. The triceps, it is supplied above this spiral groove. It is also getting the supply above the spiral groove. So the triceps is spared and the extension at the elbow is intact. And only we are able to see this wrist drop. So now coming back to the question, now we can just correlate all these symptoms over here: inability to extend at the level of wrist, fracture at this level, and then the sensory loss towards the dorsum of lateral aspect of hand and the fingers. All these are related with the radial nerve. Now coming to next question. Okay, coming to this question says that a 25-year-old male met an accident and sustained injuries in both of the upper limbs. So now the clinician has to take the vitals of the patient. For this, he will be taking a pulse. So for measuring a pulse, he decides that he will be approaching the posterior tibial artery at the level of ankle. Now so as to approach or so as to feel the pulsation of the posterior tibial artery at the ankle, what landmarks he should use? So now at what location it will be palpable? If we see the various options, whatever various options are given, the answer of this question is, it is between the medial malleolus and the medial border of tendocalcaneus in the inversion position of the foot. Now let us just talk about this location and the posterior tibial artery. Talking about the posterior tibial artery, we know that it is one of the arteries of the lower limb, and when we talk about the arteries of lower limb, if we say that this is aorta, the abdominal aorta, it gives off common iliac artery. So this one is common iliac artery. The common iliac artery divides into external iliac artery and the internal iliac artery. So the artery which is present over here, this is external iliac artery. The external iliac artery, it continues as femoral artery in the thigh. So this one is femoral artery, this one is the femoral artery. Then this femoral artery, it passes through the adductor hiatus and it reaches the popliteal fossa towards the posterior aspect of the knee. So as it reaches over here, I will show it in the dotted manner. So we can see in this level, this is a popliteal fossa, and at this point this artery which is present over here, so at this location, or we say at this location, it is popliteal artery. Now the popliteal artery divides into two. It divides into anterior tibial and the posterior tibial artery. The posterior tibial artery remains towards the posterior compartment of the leg, and the anterior tibial artery goes towards the anterior compartment of the leg. So we say the popliteal artery, it divides into anterior tibial artery and as well as posterior tibial artery. The anterior tibial artery, it continues at the dorsum of foot as dorsalis pedis artery, and the posterior tibial artery, it continues towards the sole, and over there it forms the medial and the lateral plantar arteries. Now let us see these arteries, the posterior and the anterior tibial arteries. So now this is a picture of the foot which is showing these anterior and the posterior tibial arteries. This is anterior tibial artery, this one is the posterior tibial artery. The anterior tibial artery, it is continuing as this dorsalis pedis artery, and this posterior tibial artery, As you can see, it is passing below and it is continuing as this lateral and the medial plantar arteries. Now as this posterior tibial artery, it is passing from the posterior compartment of the leg towards the sole, it is passing just behind this landmark, and this landmark is medial malleolus. It is passing just behind the medial malleolus, and there is a muscle gastrocnemius and the soleus which is present towards the posterior compartment of leg, which are having a common insertion at the calcaneum. So if this is the muscle over here, it is having a common insertion at the calcaneum, and this tendon, which is a common insertion for these muscles at the calcaneum, it is given the term as Achilles tendon, also known as tendocalcaneus. Tendocalcaneus. So now if you just see that this posterior tibial artery, you can very well see it is between the medial malleolus and this tendocalcaneus. To be more specific, medial border of tendocalcaneus. So now we know the location of the posterior tibial artery, and now so as to feel it, we slightly ask the patient to slightly invert the foot, so we are able to properly palpate this artery. So if you see this picture over here, this is showing that how to palpate the posterior tibial artery. This is the location where you can palpate the posterior tibial artery. This is the medial malleolus and this one is the tendocalcaneus. So this is the medial malleolus and this is the tendocalcaneus, and in between you can feel the pulsation of posterior tibial artery. Now coming to the next question, it says patient underwent the removal of left submandibular salivary gland and a nerve was damaged, which is the lingual nerve. The lingual nerve was damaged. Now which of the following statement is correct? You have to see that what will be the effect of that lingual nerve injury. Now before coming to this options, let us discuss about it. If I talk about the lingual nerve, now this is a pathway which is showing that the lingual nerve is carrying the fibers, parasympathetic fibers, so as to supply the submandibular gland and the sublingual gland. So let us see this pathway over here. Starting from this point, this is the superior salivatory nucleus. The parasympathetic fibers, we say the parasympathetic fibers, they pass through, they like passing over here through the cauda tympani nerve. So it is the facial nerve basically over here passing through facial nerve, then it reaches towards the cauda tympani nerve. This is the cauda tympani nerve, and now this connects, or these fibers now they go towards this nerve which is the lingual nerve. This is the lingual nerve. Now this lingual nerve over here, it is further giving fibers to a ganglia which is located over here, and this ganglia is submandibular ganglia, and from here the parasympathetic fibers, they are distributed to this gland. The gland is submandibular gland, and apart from this the fibers they also reach to this another gland this another gland which is sublingual gland. So by this we come to know that the lingual nerve is giving supply, parasympathetic fibers or parasympathetic supply to the two glands, that is sublingual and the submandibular gland. Apart from this, if we talk about the supply of the lingual nerve to the tongue, so when we talk about the tongue, we say then when we talk about the tongue, the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, for this the sensory supply of the anterior 2/3, the general sensation is carried by lingual nerve, and the taste sensation, it is carried by the cauda tympani. It is carried by the cauda tympani nerve. Now talking about the rest of the portion, if I talk about posterior 1/3, if I talk about the posterior 1/3 along with the circumvallate papilla, now this is for this both journal and taste sensation, for both journal and the taste sensation, they are carried by The ninth cranial nerve, that is a glossopharyngeal nerve. And for the base of the tongue, again both journal and taste sensation, it is carried by the vagus nerve. Now for the tongue, when we are talking about the tongue, the motor supply of the tongue, that is all the muscles of tongue, they are supplied by hypoglossal nerve. They are supplied by the hypoglossal nerve, and in this we are having one exception, that is except the palatoglossus. Now when we are talking about this motor supply, we have one of the major muscles over here, that is the genioglossus. It is the major muscle of the tongue and as well as considered as the safety muscle of the tongue. And if there is hypoglossal nerve injury, we utilize this genioglossus muscle so as to check that what side hypoglossal nerve injury is there. The genioglossus, the main action of the genioglossus is protrusion of tongue, and when both genioglossus they act, they lead to the protrusion of the tongue. So if there is hypoglossal nerve injury, and you ask the patient to protrude the tongue, in that case the tongue is deviated. To the side of injury, to the side of lesion. So the tongue is deviated to the side of the lesion. So this is found in the hypoglossal nerve injury. Now let us come back to the options over here. If we have to choose which statement is correct. The sublingual gland secretions are reduced because lingual nerve is affected. We have just talked about the parasympathetic supply. This is correct. Anterior 2/3 tongue taste sensation is lost. No, this is not correct because it is supplied by cauda tympani nerve. Posterior 1/3 taste sensation is lost. It is not there because it is supplied by glossopharyngeal nerve. Tongue deviated to the left side, it is due to the hypoglossal nerve injury. So the answer for this question will be the lingual nerve. Leading to A. Now coming to this question, it says a patient develops the following deformity which has been shown in this picture. So we can see that there is a prominence of this medial border of scapula and the inferior angle of the scapula over here. Now which of the muscles is involved in this case? Now characteristically, when we see this picture over here, this shows that this is winging of scapula. When you ask the patient to push the wall and there is prominence, when there is prominence of medial border and inferior angle of scapula. This condition is known as winging of scapula, and we say that this condition is due to injury of which nerve? It is due to the injury of long thoracic nerve. It is due to the injury of the long thoracic nerve which leads to the paralysis of serratus anterior. It leads to the injury of the paralysis of the serratus anterior. So that means we come to know that the muscle which will be involved in this case is the serratus anterior, because the long thoracic nerve is affected and it is leading to the winging of scapula. Now coming to the next question. Okay, now let us see this question. It says, while examining a newborn baby in the nursery, a physician notes that the urine is draining from the umbilicus. Now it is a very important finding, the urine is draining from the umbilicus. The contrast dye is introduced into the bladder through the urethra and it is confirmed radiologically that the dye is passing to the umbilicus. Now what can be the likely developmental anomaly? Now that means there is a communication between the bladder and the umbilicus, and that we know that there is a structure, embryological structure which is present, allantois. If that allantois if that allantois is patent, then it may lead to a communication between the bladder and the umbilicus, so that the urine may be coming out at the level of umbilicus. So therefore the answer of this question is allantoic fistula. And let us discuss about this allantois. If you see this picture of the embryo over here, then this is the hindgut which is present at this lower level of the caudal end of the embryo. This is the umbilical opening. This is the umbilical opening, and now we can see a embryological structure over here, this structure which is going towards the umbilical opening, and on another side it is attached to the hindgut, and this portion of the hindgut, this caudal portion of the hindgut, it is given the term as cloaca. And this structure, embryological structure, which is communication between cloaca and umbilical opening, it is given the term as the allantois. Now when we are talking about the cloaca, we say the cloaca, it is actually divided into definitive urogenital sinus and also it gives rise to the primitive rectum. Now the definitive urogenital sinus is the one which gives rise to the urinary bladder. It gives rise to the urinary bladder, and when we talk about this allantois, we say it is between umbilicus and urinary bladder. It is between umbilicus and urinary bladder, and it later on in the life it obliterates, and when it obliterates it leads to the formation of urachus, also known as median umbilical ligament. Median umbilical ligament. Now in case if it does not obliterate, what congenital anomalies can occur? So if you see this picture, we can see this is the picture which is showing the congenital anomalies which are associated with the allantois. Now in this picture we can see the whole of the allantois between the urinary bladder and the umbilicus, it is patent, and this condition is known as urachal fistula, or also given the term as allantoic fistula. And this is the case which has been mentioned over here in this question. So that means the urine which is present over here in the urinary bladder, it can come through the allantois and it can be coming out through the umbilicus. Apart from this allantoic fistula, if we say that some portion of the allantois is patent, it leads to the formation of the cyst known as urachal cyst. If on this side, umbilical side, if some portion is patent over here, it leads to the formation of urachal sinus. These are the other congenital anomalies which can be associated with the allantois. So for over here the answer is allantoic fistula. Okay, now coming to this next question, it says a patient mother while bathing her child noticed that there is no testis in the scrotum, and on examination, now this is an important point, on examination, one on right side, right testis was in inguinal region, left was in perineum. Now what is the diagnosis over here? The diagnosis over here is that the right side testis is in the inguinal region, that means it has not descended till now. So we say on the right side it is undescended testis. On the left side it has been written it is in the perineum, which is not its normal location. So we say it is the left ectopic testis. So now when we are talking about the testis, this is the normal location of the descent of the testis. The testis initially is present in the abdomen, in the abdominal cavity, or we can say in the abdomen, and later on it descends downward through the inguinal canal and it reaches to the scrotum. This is the normal descent of the testis, and if we say if the testis is present at any of the location in between, that means there is arrest in the descent of the testis, known as undescended testis. known as undescended testis. Now, if the testis is present at any other location apart from the locations mentioned over here, like it can be present in the perineum, or it can be present in the thigh, or it can be present in the anti-abdominal wall, in such cases it is given the term as ectopic testis. So, such kind, like this is present in the perineum, this will be termed as ectopic testis, a location which is other than the normal. Now, talking about the descent of testis over here, when we talk about the descent of the testis over here, we say at the 3rd month of intrauterine life, the testis is present at the level of iliac fossa. It is present at the level of iliac fossa. By 4th to 6th month of intrauterine life, it reaches the deep inguinal ring. Then by the 7th month, it passes through inguinal canal. 8th month, it is present at the superficial inguinal ring. It is present at the superficial inguinal ring, and by the 9th month, it reaches the scrotum. So, this is the complete descent of the testis. And if the testis is located at like deep inguinal ring or the inguinal canal or the superficial inguinal ring, then we use the term as an undescended testis. Okay, now coming to the next question. Okay, in this question you have to choose the correct statement, correct sequence to muscle contraction in the ejaculation. Now, whenever talking about the ejaculation, it is by the sympathetic nerves and the muscles which are responsible for it. So, if you see the muscles over here, these are the muscles of the perineum. The muscle which surrounds this bulb of the penis over here, so the muscle which is present over here, this muscle is bulbospongiosus. This muscle is the bulbospongiosus, and the muscle which is towards the crus of the penis, that is towards the lateral aspect over here, we can see this muscle. This muscle which I am drawing in the red color, this is the ischiocavernosus. The ischiocavernosus and the bulbospongiosus. The bulbospongiosus muscle, it is okay, over here when we are talking about the ejaculation process, we say that the muscle which contracts initially, these are the muscles, smooth muscles of vas deferens, then we say of seminal vesicles and the prostate. So, there is contraction of these smooth muscles over here, and along with this we say there is contraction of the ischiocavernosus muscle also. The ischiocavernosus muscle also. Now, after this the contraction of another muscle is there, and that is contraction of internal urethral sphincter. It is a contraction of the internal urethral sphincter, or you can say the urethralis muscle, and this is to prevent the passage of the semen towards the urinary bladder. So, that muscle over there, the internal urethral sphincter, that will contract, so as to prevent the retrograde ejaculation. Now, after this, finally for the ejaculation process to occur, the muscle which will be contracting is contraction of bulbospongiosus. Leading to this ejaculation process. So, this is the contraction of the muscles in order, and if we come back over here, so we can see the answer for this question will be A, ischiocavernosus, then urethralis, and after that the bulbospongiosus muscle. Okay, now coming to this next question, it says a lesion in the left sided motor nucleus of the facial nerve, it leads to. Now, for this, first of all we should be able to tell that what will be present in the upper motor neuron palsy of the facial nerve, and what symptoms will be there in the lower motor neuron palsy of the facial nerve. Now if we see this picture over here, we can see these fibers which are coming from cerebral cortex. These fibers over here, they form the upper motor neuron. So the lesion anywhere in these fibers, it will lead to the upper motor neuron lesion, and these are the location is supranuclear. In contrast to it, any lesion in the nucleus of the facial nerve, this is the nucleus of the nerve, and the fibers which are below it, that is infranuclear fibers which are below it, over here, here, anywhere. So these are the lesion at the level of nuclear level or the infranuclear level, and this is given the term as lower motor neuron lesion. So we have defined upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron lesion. The nuclear lesion which has been asked in this question, it will be coming now in the lower motor neuron lesion. So when we talk about the upper motor neuron lesion, so in the upper motor neuron lesion, a characteristic feature is that there is sparing of the forehead. There is sparing of the forehead because the forehead is supplied, or it is getting a supply from the bilateral fibers coming from the cortex. So bilaterally the fibers are coming from the cortex and they are supplying this forehead area. So there is sparing of the forehead in the upper motor neuron lesion, and the lower aspect of the face which is involved is on the opposite side, or we say it is on the contralateral side. So when we define the upper motor neuron lesion, we say there is sparing of forehead and contralateral lower face is involved. The contralateral lower half of the face is involved. Talking about the lower motor neuron lesion, in this the same side of the face is involved. So ipsilateral half of face is involved, and in this it is also involving the forehead. So you can see the forehead is also involved over here. This is a specific feature for the lower motor neuron lesion. So now we know if we are talking about the nuclear lesion, the same side of the face is involved and it is involving the complete half of the face, and we use a term Bell's palsy for this. This is termed as Bell's palsy. Now talking about the features of the Bell's palsy, if I talk about the features of the Bell's palsy, now this is the picture which is showing the features of Bell's palsy. On this side it is the Bell's palsy which is present, and this is the normal side. And when we talk about the features of Bell's palsy, the various features are: there is loss of transverse wrinkles of forehead, there is loss of transverse wrinkles of the forehead, then inability to close the eyes, the inability to close the eyes. Apart from this, over here, loss of nasolabial fold, the nasolabial fold which is present on the either side of the lips. Then we can say that this angle of the mouth on the affected side, it is going down. The angle of the mouth towards the affected side, it goes down, as well as there is dribbling of saliva on the affected side. The dribbling of saliva is there, and we say accumulation of the food on the affected side. Accumulation of the food on the affected side. So all these are the features which are seen in the Bell's palsy, and they are all seen in the affected side. So now let us come back to the question. Now when we say that there is left-sided motor nucleus of the facial nerve which is involved, that means it is the lower motor neuron palsy, and it will be affecting the ipsilateral side, that is it will be affecting the left side. So therefore the answer of this question is C. The left-sided loss of wrinkles of the forehead is here, and as well as the left side corner of the mouth, it goes down. This is the specific feature for the Bell's palsy. Now coming to the next question, it says Deep inguinal ring, it is a defect in, or it is a gap present in, it is a gap present in the fascia transversalis or the transversalis fascia. And when we talk about the superficial inguinal ring, it is a defect or a gap in external oblique aponeurosis. Gap in external oblique aponeurosis, this is the location for the superficial inguinal ring. This is for the superficial inguinal ring. If you see this picture over here, we can very well see this is the external oblique muscle and this is its aponeurosis, and in the aponeurosis over here we can see these gaps which are present over here, and these gaps which are present over here, this is superficial inguinal ring. This is the superficial inguinal ring. On the deeper aspect, this ring which is present on the either side, this ring is the deep inguinal ring, which is actually a deficient part of the fascia transversalis, which is a deeper layer of the anti-abdominal wall. And in between this, in between the superficial ring and the deep ring, we say this inguinal canal is present. So over here, this blue colored structure, this is the inguinal canal. So the deep inguinal ring, it is present in the fascia transversalis. Okay, in this question, which type of joint is present in the arrow marked shown in the picture, the arrow marked area which is shown in the picture. So if you see this arrow over here, this is actually pointing towards the pubic symphysis, and the pubic symphysis is typically a symphysis type of joint, or we say the secondary cartilaginous joint. So it is a secondary cartilaginous joint. It is a secondary cartilaginous joint and it is also known as the symphysis type of joint. The various examples for this is pubic symphysis, as well as we include in this the manubriosternal joint. Then we also include in this xiphisternal joint, the xiphisternal joint, and at the level of the vertebral column, at the level of intervertebral disc, the joint which is between the bodies of the vertebra at the level of the intervertebral disc, that joint is also included in the secondary cartilaginous joint. So it is at the level of the vertebral column. So these are the various examples of the secondary cartilaginous joint, and this pubic symphysis, it is a secondary cartilaginous joint. Now coming to the next question over here, it says the structure which develops within the dorsal mesogastrium, that is the spleen. And let us see this let us see this picture. This is a transverse section in the developing embryo, and when the embryo is developing over here, if I say that this is the location of the stomach, this is the location of the stomach, then the mesogastrium which is present ventral to it, or we say anterior to it, that is the ventral mesogastrium. So the mesogastrium over here extending from this point to this point, it is the ventral mesogastrium. It is the ventral mesogastrium, and the one which is extending posteriorly, that is from here to here towards the dorsal side, this is the dorsal mesogastrium. Now within the ventral mesogastrium, as you can see, there is a structure which is developing over here, and that is the liver. So we say the liver, it is developing within this ventral mesogastrium. When we talk about the dorsal mesogastrium, the structure which is developing in the dorsal mesogastrium, this green colored structure, this is the spleen. This is the spleen. Apart from this, we say we are having the various derivatives of dorsal and the ventral mesogastrium. So when we see the ventral mesogastrium, it is actually giving rise to the various structures, various ligaments which are around the liver. So the ligaments which are around the liver, the ventral mesogastrium, it gives rise to the ligaments around the liver like coronary ligament, triangular ligament, the coronary ligament and this triangular ligament, and apart from this, we say lesser omentum. Apart from this, we say lesser omentum. One more ligament over here is the falciform ligament of the liver, which is developing from the ventral mesogastrium. So all these are the derivatives of ventral mesogastrium. When we talk about the dorsal mesogastrium, its derivatives, it includes greater omentum, then it includes the gastrosplenic ligament, as well as it includes the gastrophrenic ligament and the splenorenal ligament. These are the various ligaments which are derived from the dorsal mesogastrium. So we can see over here, this is the gastrosplenic ligament and this one is the splenorenal ligament. These are the various ligaments or the structures which are derived from the ventral and the dorsal mesogastrium. Okay, now coming to this question, it says the ductus arteriosus, it develops from which pharyngeal arch artery? So now when we are talking about the pharyngeal arch arteries, initially we are having the 6 pharyngeal arch arteries in which we say the 5th it completely disappears, and the rest of the pharyngeal arch arteries, they are giving rise to the various structures. So when we talk about these aortic arch arteries, so the first pharyngeal arch artery, or we can say the first aortic arch artery, it gives rise to maxillary artery on the right as well as the left side. So the right and the left both are giving rise to the maxillary artery. For the second arch artery, it gives rise to stapedial artery and hyoidal artery or the hyoid artery, again of the both sides, that is right and left. Then the third arch artery, it is giving rise to common carotid artery as well as internal carotid artery, again of the both side, that is of the right and the left side. The fourth arch artery, it gives rise to different structure on the right side and a different structure of the left side. It gives rise to arch of aorta on left side and it gives rise to right subclavian artery. It is on the right side. The fifth arch, as I have told you, it disappears and it does not give rise to any structures. Now when we talk about the sixth arch artery, it gives rise to the pulmonary artery of the both side, that is right and the left, and apart from this, on the left side, it is also giving rise to ductus arteriosus. It is also giving rise to the ductus arteriosus on the left side, which is a communication between these pulmonary artery and the arch of aorta. So the ductus arteriosus, therefore we come to know it is derived from the sixth arch artery. Okay, identify this bony landmark over here. This is a simple normal x-ray of the elbow joint, and you have to simply identify this landmark. And if you see this landmark, this is actually the medial epicondyle. For this, a schematic picture which is representing this x-ray is this one. This is the lower end of humerus, this is the radius, and this is the ulna. When we see the lower part of the humerus, we can identify the various structures, like over here this round structure is given the term as, capitulum, and this dumbbell shaped structure on its lower side, it is given the term as trochlea. The upper end of the radius is given the term as the head of the radius. This is the head of the radius. And when we talk about the ulna, this is the coronoid process of ulna. This is the coronoid process of ulna, and in the humerus on the medial and the lateral sides, this is the medial side, we are having this medial epicondyle, and this one is lateral epicondyle. So these are the various features which are present at the level of the elbow joint. These are the normal anatomical features over here, and the one which has been asked in the question is this medial epicondyle. You can very well identify, first you identify the radius and the ulna, and you will come to know that which is the medial and which is the lateral side. The ulna, towards the side of the ulna, this projection which is present. So if I come back to this picture over here, this is the humerus, this is the radius, this is the ulna. So I know that this is now the medial side and this is the lateral side, and this projection which has been pointed over here, this point is now the medial epicondyle. Okay, now coming to this question, it says identify the arrow marked structure over here. Now when we see this arrow marked structure over here, we have to identify the collection of the nucleus which is present over here. I will just draw the various nucleus which are present over here. These are the 3 nucleus which are present over here, which we need to identify. Just near this lateral ventricle, we are having this caudate nucleus. This is the caudate nucleus. Then this triangular nucleus is given the term as lentiform nucleus. This is the lentiform nucleus, and this oval shaped nucleus is thalamus. This oval shaped nucleus is thalamus. Talking about this lentiform nucleus, if I talk about the lentiform nucleus, it is divided into 2 parts. On the outer side, putamen, and on the inner side, globus pallidus. Okay, so that means the one which is present on the outer side of the lentiform nucleus is putamen, and the structure which has been marked over here, it is the outer aspect of this lentiform nucleus. So that means the answer of this question will be putamen. So the answer of this question is the putamen, and we have already identified the thalamus and the caudate nucleus over here. So this is about the various recall questions of the FMG, and thanks to all of you.